I thought it was about grief. It was about love, and this is where criticism will come later. But I thought it was about mental health, and I also thought it was about perception. So that's
No, I mean, I agree with that.
okay. Cool. So we're in agreement so far, and I think perception was the one theme it really, especially in the first act, made it really unique, and that got me extremely interested.
Hmm.
So do you agree? You agree with all those themes? Anything you'd add on?
Yeah, I think the mental health aspect is intrinsically tied to grief, really. So, because they impact each
Okay.
other in a sense. But yeah, I think ultimately beyond grief, the whole like if you want to put it into more specific terms, I think what this movie was about is the whole that your life is left with once a person that you were close with, unfortunately has to leave it prematurely, and all the having to pose questions about who they really were. Maybe you didn't know them entirely, and yeah, like I said, there's a hole that you would otherwise be able to fill with conversation or something like that that you
Yeah.
can't do anymore, and it can drive somebody insane. And I think that's kind of the specific thing that they were going for. So
Yep.
yeah,
I completely agree. But I felt that the first act and then the rest of the film are like two different films. That's something
yeah,
that really bugged me in some sense because the whole start of the film is this story about how the five stages of grief interplay with someone trying to deal with life being on their own. And I love how the direction is like we're not going to clearly tell you exactly whether there's something abnormal going on or if there's something simply to do with grief. And I love that. That it blurs that line. So you're constantly questioning. It creates that thrill. It creates that tension, right?
okay, I agree with that. I
Yeah.
like that they blur the line. However, I will say that one thing that kind of bugged me is that the way they chose to blur that line was with the easiest way out, which was dreams, and
Yeah.
they kind of did that one too
That's
many
a good
times.
point. You know what? I
And
didn't
it's
really
like,
think about it, but that's true.
yeah.
Go on.
Mhm. Yeah, no, so it's like, yeah, we're blurring the lines, but then it's a dream, and they keep doing that, and it kind of loses its luster over time. But which is why I think it's a good thing that they went into the direction they wanted to quickly, which was supernatural in this case. Another thing that I loved about this film was the choice of the supernatural that they went with. I thought was so interesting. It had this whole like pagan element to it, and it used things which actually led me down a pretty odd rabbit hole because I had no idea about the Caerdroea maze and the Louvre doll and
Yeah.
all of these like it comes from like Welsh
Really.
myth, the
Christ.
Caerdroea, yeah,
That's cool.
and it really, like, I looked it up and there's actually not much information about this. So I felt like I was also going crazy researching these things like the main character was. But it's really interesting because they chose something which is just there's not that much information about it, which leads to it being mysterious and it being a little bit creepy. Also enough so you can actually look it up, and it kind of has like this real world basis, which is nice. So that's one thing that I appreciated, how they incorporated the supernatural elements in the second act, not the
Okay,
third,
well
in the
let's talk
second
about
act.
that.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed there's kind of like I mean I did not I understand what they're going for. We've seen it they kind of take Hereditary inspiration almost from this pagan
Yes.
cult like
Hmm.
thing. I actually
Yeah.
thought that was the direction they were going in at one point. I thought okay, there's going to be this whole overarching thing that's been happening since the start that we're going to
Yeah.
find out about. So they go for something completely different but similar. But I feel like it's almost like there's 12 writers sitting down to try to come up with this script. There's so many details involved in this pagan aspect they're going for. There's like parallel universes to different abnormal entities. They've got the voodoo nature of it, and they've got this whole. It genuinely is, like I said, a parallel universe where they kind of
Yeah, it's like a
exist in.
Caradroya maze where he kind of builds these houses and they have reverse floor plans. And
Right.
I found it so clever and cool because the reason he did this is because he kind of wants to trick the entity, and it actually works for a while. And I thought it was kind of funny how like he actually tricks
So
this
yes,
being and
it's so
everything. It
cool.
was yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, he obviously has this ability. He somehow understands what this entity is after. He's after his wife, and he figures out he can
yeah.
trick this thing for as long as possible. And then he kind of gives up at some point, which I thought was a bit of a flat note. But nevertheless, I thought that was really compelling as like a
Mhm.
point. Like how creative is that? Where there's this whole double life your husband's been living,
Yeah.
and he's been able to manage it completely under the radar. I don't know how, for so long.
Yeah.
And then the whole story is kind of like working this out piece by piece. But for me, it kind of goes from at the start, this film that's really focused internally on our protagonist, right? And then it kind of goes on to this other different story where it doesn't kind of, the build up feels wasteful at the start. This beautiful first act where it's all about this, like I said, blurred the lines. We don't understand what's exactly happening, and then it just throws us this exposition where she meets the neighbor character, and he's like,
Yeah.
I saw the husband round the back. I saw him with blood on him at some point. It kind of threw me off, and I was like, that first act was so meaningful and deep, and it got me thinking.
I will say that there is a purpose for this. It wasn't out of confusion. I feel like this was very purposeful. In that, like I said, it plays into the whole theme where once that person that you were really close to is no longer there, you kind of turn into them and you're obsessed with them, and you kind of lose yourself in the process of remembering this person. You feel the need to conserve all the memories you can of them, that you kind of become them and you become obsessed with them for a while. And I think that was the purpose of it, in that it felt like the husband somehow came back to life and he was the main character now, just by proxy of the main character's grief. So I think that was the purpose. Although from a filmmaking standpoint, I do agree that it feels a little bit jarring going from that really deep character study to this. But yeah.
So I'd like to talk to you now about her acting, Beth's character. And I thought she was phenomenal overall. Like, she nailed the part. I always found that it can be easily stereotyped to try to show someone who's grieving. It can be almost put as like they're crazy. You know, it's such an easy stereotype to do. Instead, like, especially in the bar scene, she's in this moment where she's trying to finally share and rationalize what she's been going through, her experiences. And she's talking to these colleagues at the school. And some of them are like, they fit in that kind of, the blonde character at the start to me, she seems kind of like the almost like society. She's like, I'll say the right thing to help you. I'm here for you. She doesn't seem like she actually wants to help her understand.
That's interesting. I didn't see it that way. Very funny.
Yeah.
I saw it almost the complete opposite. I saw her friend as being like the guardian angel and the only good person in her life that is able to take her out of that hole. And that, I think that's how the director intended it personally.
Definitely.
She does
Yeah.
in the end.
It's
interesting that you saw it that way.
Well, I just saw it from almost like a psychological perspective, I suppose. I couldn't get, it seemed like a facade what she was to me. I couldn't loosen the idea because she seems so disingenuine. And then when you see the ginger guy opposite, he's actually asking the right questions. He notices that she wants to talk about this, rationalize it, and try to deal with it.
I completely disagree. This is so funny. I think that the other guys were completely selfish, and they just kind of wanted to look at her as a freak show. And she's like, "Oh well, the freak wants to talk about it. Let's talk about it."
Yeah, no, there was a part of that for sure.
Yeah,
like,
and,
they were all condescending.
Like, I do feel like her friend was the good character there. I don't know, but it's just about.
It was hard to weigh up my view, especially at the end when she jumps into the water and essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
She didn't exactly save her though.
She did save her. I think her hearing her and understanding that there's more, like her friend is like a way that she can make a new life. She's like the bridge. Her friend is the bridge to leave the trauma behind her. And if her friend wouldn't have been there, she would have died. She would have killed herself. So
that's interesting because the first time she yells her name, she actually has no response. It almost cuts back to the scene where she's still got the red moon above her, and the audio doesn't clip her ear. So it
I
seems
think that's
like
just tension. It's tension to build it up to make her
maybe
make
yeah.
the decision. Yeah.
I just, the way I took it is actually there was a decision that she made. That was what didn't weigh up for me because this whole thing was kind of like you can't cheat death. That was kind of what was going on in some sense for me. And
okay. We'll talk about that later. I think, but I hated that so much.
Yeah. It's a bit
stupid.
of a cliche
it
thing.
went a little bit Final Destination in there in that third act. But
I'm glad you agree with me there.
Yeah. But I will go back to the first act. I just want to say one of the best parts about this film is the visual storytelling. So I went into this film not knowing anything. The only thing I knew was the director who directed The Ritual. I love The Ritual. And so I was like, okay, I'll watch his next horror film. So I didn't know anything at all. And I literally, in the first few scenes, there are absolutely no words spoken, but I understood exactly what this film was about just by what the director chose to put in the frame and by the script. Well, not the script, but I guess the acting of the characters. like it showed the pictures of her and her husband, and you're like, okay, so maybe then we see her come through the door. Okay, she's the main character. Um, the color palette, it's it's a bit dark. The director chose a really weird choice of time. It's like they were hadn't slept the whole day and it was early morning, and then you piece
Right.
it together, and just by the acting you can tell, okay, so that her husband's dead. I
Yep.
can tell.
Yep.
And then you see her look at the letter, and you're like, he killed himself.
Yep.
And no words have been spoken so far, and I understood all of that. And I think that's masterful. I appreciate that a lot in films.
Two things.
So,
First, agree. Again, back to my point. It seems like there's 12 writers who wrote the script because they do
yeah,
this and then they don't do this. It bugs me like fuck. But
yeah.
at the start, it was beautiful and you understood exactly what was going on, and I thought it was really great. And for example, with the case, and you actually mentioned the perfect specimen. Is just in that first few moments, you don't need any words spoken. Everything is shown to you. What I wanted to ask you is, what questions were you asking at the cusp of that moment where you kind of go, okay, the husband's dead. So what questions were you asking yourself at that point? I was
Well,
wondering.
I
Yep.
realized he killed himself, and obviously, what I was wondering is why he killed himself, and I was also wondering um, where they're gonna take him, because I know this director. Have you seen The Ritual?
Yes. Yeah. Rich is
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
yeah. So we know what this director does. We know it's a horror movie, so we know that there's something not quite right about the husband. I knew that from the beginning, and I really wanted to get into the mystery and find out what that whole thing was about. That's what I was asking myself. But
There was also.
you know what I yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay.
Mhm. I was
Quickly
just
though.
gonna say, you know what I
We're both
Shit.
so about happy to talk about this.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
All right,
gonna
I'll
go.
let
I'm
you.
gonna go. I'm gonna go.
Yep,
So
yep.
there was also this visual moment in the intro where they put a bit of emphasis camera wise onto the study, the office. So there was a
Yeah.
lot of planning that went on there, and I was thinking, okay, so what has this guy done? What has he actually done in this room? You find out later.
Yes.
Obviously. What were you
And
gonna
then you
say?
come back to the office. You're right. I didn't even notice that they set up the office and everything. But yeah, that's really cool. I was gonna say what I thought in the second act of the film is I thought they were leading up to him being this kind of like insane sex trafficker for like the elites. That's what I thought he would.
Really?
That's what I thought it was about, especially when you see those bodies under the house. I was like, okay, so this dude is like an Epstein or something like
Shit.
that.
Yeah.
And I
Cool.
thought that was an interesting premise, but that's not what happened, of course. But yeah,
Okay, what else do I want to talk about? Let's talk about the double life thing then in a bit more detail, a bit more
yeah,
story
mhm.
wise. I found this just conceptually, I love this idea. Just the idea that it's not the person you knew once, and he's led this double life, and it's putting in the question of how it's about psychology of the individual, the morality of the individual. What could they have possibly done? She starts at the bottom. Beth is kind of trying to figure out if he was unfaithful, and then it expands to this point where he's actually killed hundreds of, well, we don't know, but loads of girls.
Not hundreds, but like he's
Yeah,
killed a
yeah.
few. Yeah,
And then it goes to the point where at the end you find out, well, they put it to you that he actually did it for a reason. He's kind of still got a moral compass in some sense, but it's blurred. But he
yeah.
still loved her at the end of the day, which is the important point.
Well,
Um,
he loved her to the point that he dedicated his entire life to just trying to protect her, and doing horrible things against his moral fiber to do so. So yeah,
so I
I
want to
guess.
ask you what you think about this idea as a concept, how it was executed, because I think there's holes you can pick in this idea, in the execution. Even though it was quite all right, forget the first act for now. I'm just focusing on this concept. What do you think about it?
Yeah. No, I mean, I liked it myself. I really enjoyed the way they did it, how they set up the mystery and everything. The way they did it slowly by first using that photograph, which a woman that looks like her, and as an audience, you're like, yeah, but it kind of looks a lot like her,
Yep, yep, yep.
but it didn't end up being her. And then with the whole, like I said, the whole supernatural element where they introduce the Caradroya, and she opens that book, and he has all those scribbles, and where he kind of explains the situation, I thought was really compelling. And
Well drafted as well, like really
yeah,
detailed drawings.
yeah.
Yeah.
I like I said, the whole parallel thing where there's another house which is the same somewhere, and how that implemented itself with the dreams. I liked it. I actually don't have much issues. I guess I liked the second act very much too. So maybe you can say
So
what you think.
so
What do you think
again,
the part?
yeah. Okay, let's have hopefully a happy disagreement if we can in some sense here. So what I disliked from the second act going onwards, again, is from the moment of the exposition inside the neighbor's house where he explains everything that's happening to her. She then goes on kind of like this well, let's go back to that actually. So I think that wasn't necessary, obviously, because she could have just gone through the next ongoing scenes where she kind of looks through the books, she starts to piece together information, finds the voodoo doll, she finds the house even. All of that could have been done without the need to speak to the neighbor and get that dialogue. I felt that dialogue
Ah,
was
but
unnecessary.
the reason the dialogue was there was to be misleading. It was a misdirect to make you think very negative thoughts about the husband. It was supposed to
True.
make you think that what I thought. Well, maybe that was a bit extreme on my part. I'm a bit of a weirdo. Sex trafficker is a bit extreme, but you're supposed to think that he's this kind of
Yes.
maniac.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's once again purposeful in that it makes you it puts you in the mindset of the main character because towards the end, when if you remember, she switches gears where she no longer is focused on the grief of having lost him, but she starts to almost hate him, or not hate him, but she starts to change her perception of
Yeah.
him. And when in the conversation when she talks to the girl that looks like her, she even focuses more on whether he hurt her or something like not that. The first question she asks is if he hurt her, not what they were doing. So,
Yeah.
like I said, it was just it kind of by playing with the what the audience thinks about the character, it puts you in the mindset of Beth. So
Yes, and I like that bit too because it's again harkening back to like a character study of her.
yeah,
The themes that were expressed in the first act keep flowing naturally there, where it's
yeah,
about her internal grief, her internal trying to understand this whole thing that she hasn't been a part of.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's complicated to articulate. It's for me the idea that you have the situation where Beth now is. I'm losing my thoughts here, but it's you've got these fantastic concepts like the parallel universe. You've got the whole idea of there's so much that you don't know about. And Beth, instead of being able to find it on her own, unfortunately, a lot of it was delivered through third parties. I felt like it should have been focused very much on the character study. She, I'm trying to think of specific scenarios. So she meets these other characters like these girls. I found it all just a little less grounded, I suppose, for me. Maybe it's a fair comment. You'd have to hear what you say, but she meets these people so easily. She meets the neighbor. The neighbor didn't tell her this information. It pulls me out of the experience because I'm thinking to myself, how would they not give her this information? Surely, how unreasonable of a person can you be not to give her this information? Or
Well,
meeting.
the neighbor does explain why he didn't give it. It's
Yes, he did. It
and I
was
thought
one
it was a
time.
fair enough, yeah, a fair enough reason. You don't want to like if people look happy, you don't want to like shit on their parade, I guess, especially if things
Maybe.
look good. I kind of understand it, but at the same time, I think the bigger issue is not necessarily specifically what you're saying. It's the fact that I think there could have been two different movies made here.
Yeah, that's what I said earlier. I agree with
So
that. Yes.
there's I feel like this movie could have been entirely about just the grief of losing a person, and there was no real need for this the supernatural elements to go so extreme and to go into all of this. However, I also think that there could have been another movie which was completely dedicated to these supernatural elements, and I agree that they don't really mesh
Mesh.
together.
Yeah.
They're both good and they're both there, but they don't shake hands. They're just kind of both there. So I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah, no, that I think is the most fundamental issue of the film. Unfortunately, it's just they've got so many interesting concepts. Like I said, the 12 writers in the room, and the story is trying to attack all these concepts. So even if so they do successfully, it doesn't carve out their particular niche for the film. It's like we want to do
Yes.
all of these things, and we want these two stories to run in together. It's a lot, and unfortunately, therefore, you miss detail. I think, and especially I think from the second act onwards, it's a different film, and it's kind of like, well, if you would have perhaps the first act doesn't fit with the second act for me. I know it sounds just so trivial to say, but it doesn't. For me, they do not. They seem like different
Yeah.
entities.
Regardless of what one thinks, though, I still think ultimately people will enjoy the first and
Oh
second
yeah,
acts.
yeah, oh,
The,
yeah.
the third act is where things kind of take a nosedive. But
Hmm.
before we get into that, I just want to say one more thing. This film succeeds with flying colors, even just as a basic horror movie. Like it has
Yes.
some of the most effective scares I've ever seen. Like especially if you get immersed and you watch it at night and without any back ambient noise. It's a really effective horror movie because having the whole element about the grief tied into it kind of makes it even more palpable and just mechanically the director does some pretty clever stuff with having that kind of being which it looks like a shaded being, but then the camera perspective changes and then there's nothing there, and you it's and also using the noises. And one thing that he does extremely well is I mean, this is a pretty general trick that most people do now, but I like it where you focus on a piece of like really important information and there's ambient noise,
Yep.
and then all of a sudden, whilst you're so entranced and focused on that piece of information, the ambient noise goes away and gets replaced by this pressure, like this building pressure.
Yeah.
It's almost like a non-sound, but it is like, I think, like some kind of binaural or subtle thing going on, and then it almost puts you in this stage where it's like between calm and unease, and then it like it
Mm-hmm.
goes like really loud and explodes from there. And I think that's like a really effective scare because it always succeeds in giving me goosebumps. And yeah,
Yeah.
so
They use sound designer very well in this
yeah.
film. Very well. There's this one track that they keep playing. Obviously, it's important to the story, but that it kind of has this really terrible feeling to it. It's her desperation and struggle is just magnified by this kind of joyful sound that I don't know the song by heart, but it's
Yeah, me neither. Yeah,
but
but
also
plus
just
like yeah,
sorry. Let
just the
me
one thing. Yeah,
go
go
on.
ahead.
Go on then. Go on. Go on. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say the song is there's also the fact that the song was her husband's like favorite and it was used at
Yes.
their wedding, right? And so
Yeah. So with the scares, it's I love how they refrain from using CGI, bar one scene if they do. It seems like they use strings and they there's a whole levitation moment which I thought was
yeah, yeah,
wonderful. I loved it.
yeah.
But they just refrain from using CGI. Instead, they use off camera to scare you. They use tension building right. Um, they use some interesting techniques with the shadow. I now that I wanted to
Yeah.
talk about. I thought it was really cool.
Yes.
Not executed perfectly for me, but
No.
really cool.
Yeah.
There was one moment with like a pillar. And you see the character align the pillar to a door angle and sees a glance of a shadow, and it's actually some sort of spirit of sorts, and it rotates.
Yeah.
And my only criticism with it is this: I thought the sound at the moment was a bit off. They used
Mm.
sound design improperly, in my view. There, it's kind of like got
Okay.
a weird wooden sound to it. It's kind of
I
like a
can't remember
screeching sound.
exactly that scene,
I implore you to
but yeah,
check it out and
I'll
give me
check it
your
out.
feedback. But
But generally the sound design's amazing.
yeah,
Like the part where she falls asleep on her friend's lap.
You're safe? Safe from what? I guess we'll never know, will we, Claire? Do you really believe in ghosts? No. I was just being nice. You are. You're very, very nice. Sure you don't want me to stay? Maybe just till I go to sleep.
And then
Oh, that
every
keeps-
yeah, and then the TV goes on and like you have this insane. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a cacophony of sound, and there's also this thing that talks to her. Yeah, it's a very good horror movie. Um, but I think we should now talk into the elephant in the room. Talk about the elephant in the room, which is the third act. So
I
yeah,
agree. I'm just wondering to summarize for the better part of our discussion on Act One and Two. It's important to say that is a masterfully crafted film in my view. I don't think there's many issues besides some just conceptual points that could be here or there.
Mm,
I also would say that this film is not for everyone, but for someone who is a film artist who appreciates good cinema, they're gonna love this film for what it is because it's just cinematographically masterfully done. The audio is beautiful. The acting is superb. So I'm just putting that to that for the first two acts. Um, Act three, then, yeah.
yeah,
Let's discuss the climax, the build up, what they wanted to kind of give off as their final messages. and whether they hit home. I thought there was some great ideas here. Execution is my issue, basically. What's your general synopsis then?
Yeah, no, the third act, especially given what a compelling mystery is created in the first and second act, is I think the best word to describe it is a profound disappointment. That's how I would describe the third act. It all felt like it was leading to something compelling, and it never came. Now, that's not to say that there's nothing good about it. There were some cool elements. There was the part where she's kind of stuck in the house, and then you look through the mirror, and then there's like two worlds, and it's spinning, and it plays into the whole perspective thing. That was really cool. But my biggest issue is the reveal of what the supernatural being is. And okay, so what happened is that apparently, when Beth died for a small amount of time when she was in an accident when she was young, she was supposed to die, but instead she was resuscitated. And so this thing, we're never told what it is. It's like this void thing, attached itself to her, and has been following her ever since and been trying to reclaim her. And in order to do so, this thing started talking to her husband and trying to get her husband to kill her. But instead, her husband tried to fight it and trick this thing by building houses with reverse plans and Kerdroya mazes and using a whole bunch of pagan magic to try to trick it and keep it from killing Beth, and eventually resorted to killing innocent women that looked like Beth to do so. And eventually he couldn't take it anymore, and he killed himself, thinking that if he kills himself, this whole thing will stop, and basically Beth is safe, which is not true. And just let me know what you think about this general idea. Yeah.
So obviously, I think the story, the direction it was going in was quite good. I agree with you. The main issue is first the reveal of the entity itself, the question mark that still hangs over that entity's head, and then the conclusion to it that I felt the conclusion, the very end on the boat, didn't give me a deeper sense of understanding of the film and the message it was trying to share. I'm listening to what you said prior about the whole bridge building arm of a friend, that she can kind of leave the grief behind and move on, but that's not a compelling enough reason for me. I was looking for a supernatural conclusion as well as an internal character conclusion, but they didn't mesh. The supernatural thing was completely not really done to the end properly. That's kind of my running thoughts. It's a shame. I'm not sure what else to share.
And also, it made me think of Final Destination. Like, you were supposed to die, but instead you survived, and now we're gonna kill you. It's just plus, it was interesting. It was like a kind of nihilistic being in that it is nothing. It is like this void being. So like the afterlife is nothing in an atheistic way, but nothing is a being, like a
It's
malevolent.
like an oxymoron, isn't it?
Yeah, an oxymoron, which is kind of interesting. I just didn't like how they put this idea in the context of like a Final Destination shenanigans thing. I thought that was just really lame.
It cheapened it, didn't it?
It cheapened it. Also, like, I feel like if you started hearing voices telling you to kill your wife and you weren't actually schizophrenic, you would probably just get help. And right, you wouldn't just accept it as being a supernatural thing. And
I had the same issue. There's multiple times when the authorities or emergency services could have been called. I like to be more forgiving for this because it's a film, and you have to try to imagine the circumstance in which the character would react.
Yeah.
Imagine you're in that situation. Would you really immediately call the police, or would you deal with this first and think about this? Maybe. But when she discovers the bodies, I would have. She had ample time to call the police. I would have thought that would have been the first thing.
That was so funny, like, because I actually think that's hilarious. Because I also thought that. I was like, okay, you found these bodies, you probably should call the police, even if you somehow want to posthumously protect your husband somehow, which doesn't make sense. But even if you do want to do that, just to protect yourself in case this does come out in the future to not be an accessory to murder, you should call the police.
Yes.
Of course, she was in a bad mental state. But what was funny is that she called her friend and she said, "I don't know what to do," and I literally shouted at the screen, "Call the police!" That's what I can tell you what to do.
But interestingly enough,
yeah.
that decision therefore kind of saved her life in some sense. So maybe the counter argument is that if she called the police, perhaps they wouldn't have known where she was. Perhaps. Anyway, it's still thin. But let's talk about the moment on the boat, because I feel like that's the moment which is meant to be the deepest, right? It's meant to be the conclusion of all conclusions. The way I see it is she made a decision to not kill herself and enter the nothingness realm that she was destined for. Why? I simply just thought it was in the most fundamental sense, it was just about triumphance. It was about her just getting over the things that she's been through. That was all. That was for me what the meaning was, which is small and not really deeper enough. But that was all. What did you think of it?
I know that's something I disagree with completely. I think it was a good ending. I think, like I said, the point of it was that she found that there is a future in life for her, and that there is a bridge that she can walk on away from this solitary place. And I don't think you need anything complex on top of that, because in real life too, that's the same thing. You know, you have to. As sad as it is, you have to just get over the loss of this person and continue your life, and there's nothing else you can do, and that just is what it is. And maybe you can be lucky to have somebody like her friend that can help you through that, and she did. I think that's fine.
I think what I'm trying to say actually is my criticism to the third act alone is just how they have a cool idea, like the whole when your heart stopped before when you died and I'm back now. I know it is somewhat of a cliche topic to say that you can't cheat death, but it can.
Yeah,
perhaps,
final destination.
Yeah, they kind of ruined the idea anyway, but perhaps you can do it properly. And what I was thinking is there's a lovely line in this film, which is I'm what you felt when your heart stopped. And I thought that could have been a nice ending. Something to that end, maybe a short scene afterwards, maybe not. That at least explains who he is. You kind of understand, it leaves a bit of mystery to it still. I felt like there was too much answer to the entity to an extent. It's kind of like, while there is still a question mark over, it's a bit complicated. While there is still a question mark over his head to what he is he death or is he a demon? There's still an answer that he is the reincarnated, or if not reincarnated, he is still your husband in some sense, and he's nothingness, but not something.
He is nothingness, as I said. He's like a nihilistic deity. He is, in a contradictory way, he is nothing. He is the void. He is a vacuum, but
it's weird
at the same time. It's weird, but I think it's interesting. But it is odd. I think that's what it's supposed to be, and the reason why it's the reason why it's incorporated to look like the husband is because it's supposed to be a mirror or a representation or a metaphor for the hole in your life that is left when you miss a person, I guess. Because basically all the memories that you have of them, whether they are good or bad, they are actually actively negative to your life right now, because they're kind of killing you in a sense. So I think that's what they're trying to say.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
The execution was a bit poor. I will admit. I still think it's like, I understand why they chose to do it this way, just to finish the whole conceptual arc. But I would have thought it would be quite interesting if her husband was actually just an absolute scumbag, and he was involved in some weird rituals with elites or whatever, something like that.
Yeah, and I thought the spin on his still having this love for her was a nice spin, but was it a necessary spin? I'm not sure. He was trying to protect her, but I wanted to close my only last thoughts I have to share and ask your questions on is the boat and its symbolic nature, because I was trying to think about what the hell is a boat dealing with this.
Of course. The boatman, the ferry, Charon the boatman from Greek myth.
Right, no, I was completely oblivious to it, unfortunately. I wanted you to tell me
a bit more
sorry. If you knew much about it. Because I was trying to think, what the hell does this boat mean? And why is it some place that he killed himself on and maybe she will? And I was thinking, what's this about?
Yeah, so in Greek myth, the way you get transported to the underworld is on the river Styx by the boatman, Charon. And you travel the river to the underworld with on a boat, very much like the one in this film. So I think that's kind of what they were trying to do there. And there is kind of something interesting about the idea of letting yourself go into death by traveling on a calm river.
Yeah, there's that.
It's interesting.
I know
I
that
think
it
that's
was I know that it was kind of done in classic philosophy, like if you're a sophist, is it where you just I know that that was part of their spoken language, something to do with a river, but I didn't think that that connection was there. But interesting.
yep.
Yeah, and the last point is on the moon, and just I love the visual use of showing the two moons towards the end. I thought
Yeah.
that was beautiful, and it made me think a lot in detail about what was going on. Unfortunately, to no avail because it didn't matter. But what was your thoughts on the moon and how it was often shown to reinforce the look. It reminded me of it's not Annihilation, it's the other movie that Synchronic, where they kind of look up at the stars and
Yeah.
they kind of think about the outer worldly beyond their control things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was a reinforcement of the key theme, which was alternate worlds. Once
Yes.
again, it's layered alternate worlds. There's a Caradroia maze with the reverse floor plan. There's the literal alternate worlds in the two mirrors. Then there's the alternate world in the memories that you have of the person that died and living in the past
Right. Yep.
and the future. And it's just like, I think that's what it represents. And ultimately, in the end, it's just leaving the gravitational field of the previous planet or moon and going to the next one. So,
Yeah. Any final thoughts you'd like to add? I really enjoyed this film, by the way. Thanks for the recommendation, Peter. Really
yeah,
appreciate it.
no worries. Yeah, it was really good. I feel like it could have been even better. Is the thing. With a few choices, I do think it was better than the Ritual overall. I think I'm not overall. Maybe.
I wouldn't really compare them, if I'm honest.
Yeah, they're very different.
but-
They're both very good films. I think the most important thing is this director is really good, and I can't wait to see more of what he's doing.
Yep.
We talked about we talked about this either in a audio only podcast that we did a while ago or a video one. I can't remember, but we said how there's like this new like collective of really talented horror
yes.
directors, and this is one of them. And alongside Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, and yeah, I think it's really interesting that we have this like new wave of horror. It's really good. So, yeah.
Agreed. Should we give it a rating for the classic things that YouTubers do?
Yeah,
What
okay.
should we do? I would. Now, before our podcast, actually, let's do this. Before our podcast, before we had a conversation about this, as this is our first time chatting about it, I was sitting at a 7. I think now I'm putting it up to a 7.5 after our
Okay.
podcast. Based on the understandings you've brought forward with the ending, you've clarified some thoughts for me, and kind of reminded me some of the themes that do really kind of link well. Yeah, 7.5 I rate it out of 10.
I'd give it an 8.5. I still think it was a very good film. Yeah. Because I only really just was a bit. Just one. Honestly, it wasn't even the entire third act. For me, the only element which really bothered me was the choice of the being and its motivations and
Yeah,
the
was-
whole element where it's coming back for you. And I just didn't like that idea, and that's kind of what ruined the third act. But other than that, I loved everything in the film. So
Yeah, and we should also endorse it and say to go check it out if you haven't seen it, because it's a good film. So,
yeah, sure.
all right. Okay, thanks for watching.
Yeah.